Night falls differently in Moscow when the machinery of power senses danger. On this particular evening, the streets are calm on the surface, traffic lights blinking in their usual rhythm, apartment windows glowing softly. But beneath that calm, the Russian state is holding its breath. In the deepest layers of the Kremlin's security apparatus, alarms are not blaring, but protocols are shifting. Routes are being reconsidered. Communications are tightening. Somewhere in the capital's vast security grid, a calculation has changed. This is not a rumor whispered on social media or a sensational claim born of speculation. This is a moment that, according to verified international reporting, sent an unmistakable tremor through Russia's leadership circle. A high-security convoy, linked to presidential movement contingencies, has come under drone attack. The implications of that sentence are enormous. For decades, Vladimir Putin's physical security has been treated as sacrosanct, an untouchable constant in a system built around control, secrecy, and deterrence. The Russian president does not simply travel, he disappears into layers of misdirection. Decoy convoys, alternate aircraft, trains without markings, routes cleared hours in advance by overlapping agencies. His presence is often known only after he has arrived or left. And yet, tonight, something pierced that veil. According to multiple converging reports from defense analysts and regional observers, unmanned aerial systems struck vehicles associated with a protected convoy operating under emergency movement protocols. The Kremlin has not confirmed the details. It may never do so. But silence in this case speaks loudly. Because when a state built on projecting invulnerability refuses to deny an event outright, it suggests the damage is not just physical. It is psychological. This is not simply about drones hitting metal. This is about the erosion of a narrative. For years, Moscow has portrayed itself as a fortress under siege yet unbreachable. From Red Square parades showcasing intercontinental missiles to carefully staged images of Putin piloting aircraft or inspecting troops, the message has been relentless. The Russian state is strong, vigilant, untouchable. The war in Ukraine was supposed to reinforce that image, an assertion of dominance, speed, and control. Instead, it has done the opposite. As the conflict dragged on, Ukraine adapted. Lacking the sheer mass of Russia's conventional forces, Kiev invested in innovation, particularly in drone warfare. Cheap, flexible, and increasingly precise, drones became tools not just of battlefield disruption but of strategic messaging. Oil depots ignited deep inside Russian territory. Airbases far from the front lines were suddenly vulnerable. Radar installations blinked offline. Each strike carried a message. Distance no longer guarantees safety. But a convoy? That crosses a line. A convoy linked to presidential security is not merely a target of opportunity. It represents the moving nerve center of state power. Even if the president himself was not inside, something Russian security doctrine makes intentionally ambiguous, the symbolism is devastating. It suggests that adversaries are not just probing Russia's borders, they are mapping its core. Inside the Kremlin, this forces an immediate reassessment. Every assumption about internal security becomes suspect. Every route, every driver, every electronic signal is now a potential liability. The psychological effect ripples outward, from elite security units to regional governors, from military commanders to intelligence officers. If the president's movement protocols can be disrupted, what does that say about everyone else? This is how modern warfare works in the 21st century. Not with dramatic invasions alone, but with persistent pressure on confidence, with uncertainty, with the sense that nowhere is entirely safe, not even for the most powerful man in Russia. The drones themselves are almost secondary. What matters is the message they deliver. According to analysts familiar with asymmetric warfare, drone strikes against symbolic targets are designed to do exactly this: force overreaction, drain resources, paralyze decision-making. When a leadership circle begins to fear its own mobility, it becomes less agile, more insular, more defensive. Meetings move underground. Travel decreases. Exposure shrinks. And with that contraction comes isolation. This is especially dangerous for a system like Putin's, one that relies heavily on personal authority and centralized control. Unlike democratic systems, where institutions can function independently of individual leaders, Russia's power structure is deeply personalized. Disrupt the person, and you disrupt the system. Which brings us to the question Moscow does not want asked. How close did this come? Russian state media, when it addresses the incident at all, frames it as an attempted provocation, a minor security breach, swiftly neutralized. There are no images, no timelines, no acknowledgement of vulnerability. But behind the scenes, the response tells a different story. Air defenses around Moscow have intensified. Electronic warfare units have been redeployed inward, away from the front. Flight restrictions tighten with little notice. These are not the actions of a state that feels secure. They are the actions of a state recalibrating under pressure. Internationally, the reaction is cautious but unmistakable. Western intelligence agencies do not rush to comment, but briefings quietly acknowledge the escalation. This is no longer just about Ukraine defending its territory. It is about demonstrating reach, about showing that even the most guarded corridors of power are within conceptual range. For Ukraine, the strategic value is enormous. Without matching Russia tank for tank or plane for plane, Kiev has found a way to shift the psychological balance. Each successful deep strike forces Moscow to divert resources away from the battlefield and toward internal defense. Every additional layer of protection around the Kremlin is one less layer supporting troops at the front. And for Putin personally, the impact is deeply unsettling. A leader who has cultivated an image of control now faces an invisible threat that cannot be intimidated, arrested, or negotiated with. Drones do not fear power. They do not respond to speeches. They simply fly. As this reality settles in, the convoy strike becomes more than an incident. It becomes a symbol of a war entering a new phase, one where lines between front and rear, between battlefield and capital, are increasingly blurred. And this is only the beginning. Because if a convoy can be hit once, the question is not whether it can happen again, but what happens next when the pressure continues to rise. In Part 2, we follow the trail deeper, inside Russia's security architecture, the silent panic beneath the public calm, and the growing realization that the rules of this war have irrevocably changed. If Part 1 revealed the shockwave, Part 2 takes us inside the walls, into the machinery that was never meant to be seen trembling. For decades, Russia's internal security model has been built like a sealed vault. At its core is the Federal Protective Service, the FSO, an organization that operates in near-total opacity. Its mandate is singular and absolute: protect the president at all costs. Not just his life, but the perception of his invulnerability. Routes are classified. Vehicles are rotated. Entire highways can be closed without explanation. Even senior officials often learn of presidential movements only after they occur. This system was designed in the aftermath of the Soviet collapse, when chaos bred paranoia and survival demanded total control. Vladimir Putin, a former intelligence officer shaped by the KGB's worldview, refined it further. He understood something fundamental. Power is not just exercised, it is performed. And nothing undermines performance faster than visible vulnerability. That is why the convoy strike matters so deeply. Because within Russia's security culture, the convoy is not merely transport. It is a mobile extension of the Kremlin itself, a moving bubble of authority, wrapped in layers of deception and force. To breach that bubble, even partially, is to puncture a myth that has taken decades to construct. According to analysts familiar with Russian doctrine, presidential convoys operate under multiple overlapping assumptions. First, that airspace above them is sanitized. Second, that electronic warfare units suppress unauthorized signals. Third, that potential attackers lack the intelligence precision to identify the correct target among decoys. The drone strike challenges all three assumptions simultaneously. This is where panic quietly begins. Not the cinematic panic of shouting officers or flashing red lights, but the bureaucratic panic of emergency meetings, revised threat matrices, and rewritten contingency plans. Inside the Kremlin's security corridors, questions start circulating that no one wants to voice aloud. Was this reconnaissance or execution? Was the convoy tracked in real time or intercepted by chance? Was this a single operation or a test? Each question carries consequences. If the convoy was deliberately targeted, it implies a level of intelligence penetration Moscow finds intolerable. It suggests that adversaries may possess insight into movement schedules, signal emissions, or route selection algorithms. That would indicate not just technological capability, but human access, leaks, moles, or compromised contractors. And that possibility is far more destabilizing than drones alone. Historically, authoritarian systems fear internal betrayal more than external attack. Missiles can be intercepted. Aircraft can be shot down. But doubt corrodes from within. When loyalty becomes uncertain, trust collapses. And when trust collapses, control follows. This is why, in the days following the convoy incident, reports began emerging of intensified counterintelligence sweeps. Background checks reopened. Communications monitored more aggressively. Access privileges quietly revoked. Entire departments suddenly restructured. These actions rarely make headlines, but they leave scars within the system. They also slow it down. Every added security layer introduces friction. Every additional approval delays decision-making. And in wartime, delay is dangerous. Meanwhile, the public narrative remains tightly managed. Russian state television avoids specifics, framing the broader drone threat as proof of external hostility rather than internal weakness. Anchors speak of resilience, of thwarted attacks, of Russia standing firm against aggression. But the language has shifted subtly. Where there was once confidence, there is now vigilance. Where there was bravado, there is caution. This tonal change does not go unnoticed. Ordinary Russians may not know the details of a convoy strike, but they understand atmosphere. They notice increased air defense units around cities. They hear more frequent alerts. They see checkpoints appear and disappear without explanation. These signals accumulate, feeding a low-grade anxiety that contradicts official assurances of control. And anxiety is contagious. Within the elite, the effect is magnified. Oligarchs, senior bureaucrats, and regional power brokers have long calibrated their loyalty to Putin based on one assumption, that he is the ultimate guarantor of stability. As long as he is secure, the system holds. But when that security appears less absolute, even symbolically, it introduces risk calculations that were previously unthinkable. History offers stark precedents. From the late Soviet era to other modern authoritarian states, moments of perceived vulnerability at the top often trigger quiet repositioning below. Not immediate rebellion, but hedging. Assets moved abroad. Families relocated. Alliances reassessed. Public loyalty maintained. Private contingency plans activated. The convoy strike accelerates that process. And then there is the military dimension. Russian generals understand what this means tactically. If drone technology can threaten protected convoys, it can threaten command vehicles, mobile headquarters, and logistics nodes far from the front. The psychological barrier separating rear from frontline is eroding. This forces commanders to disperse, conceal, and harden assets, again slowing coordination and reducing efficiency. Ukraine, by contrast, thrives in this environment. According to military analysts, Kiev's strategy increasingly favors distributed pressure rather than decisive singular blows. The goal is not to topple the Kremlin overnight, but to keep it off balance indefinitely. To force Russia to defend everywhere, all the time. To exhaust attention, resources, and morale. The convoy strike fits perfectly into this logic. It does not need to be repeated frequently. It only needs to be plausible. The mere possibility that it could happen again reshapes behavior. Every movement becomes a risk assessment. Every journey a calculated exposure. For Putin himself, this is deeply personal. He has long minimized travel risk by limiting public appearances and relying on tightly controlled environments. Yet leadership, especially during war, demands visibility. Meetings with generals. Visits to industrial sites. Appearances meant to project resolve. Each appearance now carries an added layer of tension. Does he appear less? Does he delegate more? Does he retreat further into isolation? Each option carries costs. Appear less, and he risks seeming detached. Delegate more, and he dilutes centralized authority. Isolate further, and he narrows the information funnel, increasing the risk of miscalculation. This is the paradox of power under pressure. The convoy strike does not force immediate answers, but it forces the question. Internationally, the incident also recalibrates perceptions. Allies and adversaries alike take note. It signals that Russia's internal defenses are not impermeable, that innovation and persistence can penetrate even the most guarded systems. For countries watching from the sidelines, it alters strategic calculus. Deterrence relies on credibility, and credibility, once cracked, is difficult to fully restore. As this realization spreads, from Moscow to Washington, from Kiev to Beijing, the convoy strike takes on a broader meaning. It becomes a data point in a larger story about the evolution of warfare, power, and vulnerability in a world where technology democratizes reach. And yet, this story is still unfolding. Because the most dangerous phase is not the strike itself, but the response. How Russia chooses to adapt, retaliate, or escalate will shape the next chapter of this war. Will it double down on repression and internal control? Will it expand the battlefield? Or will it attempt to restore deterrence through dramatic displays of force? Those decisions are being debated right now, behind closed doors, under intense pressure.